Welcome, all you adventurous readers, to the epic worlds of Alfred Döblin, where we explore the life and works of this fascinating but little-known early 20th century writer, brought to you by the website beyondalexanderplatz.com.
Welcome to episode 2, where we'll be concentrating on the concept of the epic. Right, what is an epic? Why and how? I'm Chris Godwin.
And I'm Katie Kavanagh. Well, that's a great first question, Chris. What is an epic?
To understand what Döblin meant by this, we have to look at his view of the standard novel, which he had a very low opinion of, because the standard novel has a contrived plot invented by, one particular writer sitting in his room, and the plot usually involves something about sex or murder or whatever. A lot of amateur psychology in it about the hero or the heroine or the villain, and a very shallow view about the reality of life.
So when I think of epic, I always think something grand, something big, but mainly something that goes on and on.
Yes, because the epic is as large as life.
Right. Okay.
And it involves something of kind of universal significance, which is why epics have resounded with different generations over thousands of years. So they've obviously got something which appeals to deep psychology in human beings.
Now we know already from episode 1 that Döblin wrote a variety of material, but was most of his material epic based?
Well, I suppose it depends actually how you count it, by page counts or word counts or items or whatever. I mean, he wrote 9 epic fictions.
Right.
But I mean, the longest of those was like 2,200 pages in its current printed version.
Okay.
Right. And I don't think any of them were less than about 500 pages.
Right.
So, I mean, these were enormous blocks of work which came along at intervals of 3 or 4 or 5 years. But in between, he was producing an enormous amount of essay material, interview material, lectures, reviews of theatre and of books, writings on nature, on criminology, actually.
Oh, okay.
He wrote one book about a famous murder case where 2 girlfriends murdered the husband of one of them.
Right. So did the way that he worked, did he tend just to have one project on the go at a time, or would he have a few? So if he's working on, say, Manas, is he going to have another project working alongside that, or did he just focus in on each?
Well, I think while he was writing one of these epics, he would be very, very focused on the writing, sometimes almost to the point of having a nervous breakdown.
Right.
So I would imagine at the time he was actually doing the writing, he would have kind of closed the door on extraneous things like requests from newspapers to fill in questionnaires, this kind of thing.
Right. And we can't forget as well that obviously he had his other job, his main income, happening at the same time as a neurologist.
Yeah, well, occasionally he sort of went on holiday for that, so he could spend a few weeks in isolation putting the final chapters to one of his books.
Right, interesting. Yeah. Okay, Chris, so we know that he enjoyed writing epics. So when did he write his first epic?
Well, he wrote that in around 1912.
Okay, and what was that named?
That was Wanglund, the three leaps of Wanglund.
Okay.
Yeah. But that, of course, was already a decade into his writing career, more than a decade, in fact. So in the previous 10 years or so, he'd been writing several short stories. Several of those were based on abnormal psychology. They were kind of penetrating deeper into how characters behave, rather than the more shallow way that the characters in a standard story or novel were depicted. His early short stories were translated recently by Damien Searles in a book called Bright Magic, in case readers want to look that one up.
Okay.
So he was, really already looking to dig beneath the surface into deeper reality of, what drives human beings.
Okay, and of course his his medical career was entrenched in that as well. What does drive human beings?
Well,
That's the neurologist side of him.
Yes, I mean he qualified as a doctor with a thesis on memory disorders in a particular syndrome that was going around at the time, which affected sort of late stage alcoholics. And we're going to do a reading later on, Katie.
Ooh.
A dramatised reading of
Excellent.
an interaction between Dr. Döblin and a particular patient, which he treated in his thesis.
Oh, fantastic!
So
okay,
it was
we'll
a
look
very
forward to that.
very interesting how the amnesiac patients' fabulations could then be sort of transferred across to the way that writers exercise their imaginations and put things together in strange ways which actually entertain people and make people feel they're really learning something about the world.
That's really interesting. Who's obviously seeing a side of human life that's often not talked about or not seen. So he has privy to. I mean, certainly mental health is a big topic at the moment and going forward. But back then.
Well, psychology was, of course, had already in the middle of the 19th century had been sort of becoming a kind of professional medical discipline. But yes, I mean this.
But I guess there's always been an appetite from readers who are curious about that side of things.
Oh yes. I mean this way, why Dostoevsky was so. Much read throughout Europe when the character of his Raskolnikov, the guy who decides just to kill an old lady just to see if he can get away with it.
Oh, crikey!
Yeah.
Sorry, we digress.
No problem.
Take us back on track.
But of course, I mean, at the same time, yes, I mean his interest in the real kind of trying. One of his medical lines of research was to see how do hormones interact with the mind. That turned out to be sort of not able to go very far, but he was really interested in this kind of the way the mind and the body affect each other. But he was also, of course, mixing with this avant-garde bunch of poets and artists who were part of this ferment of culture in the pre-First World War
And so that's the time
Germany.
of the Expressionists.
Yes, yeah. Well, they eventually sort of became coalesced as a sort of the Expressionist movement.
As a group, okay.
Yes, and particularly with art exhibitions where we had all these artists doing quite garish pictures of the same thing seen from different perspectives, and so on, or collages sort of incongruous objects sort of placed together, this kind of thing. But I mean, Döblin was a very enthusiastic kind of member of that circle at first. He helped to set up the leading journal, the Der Sturm. But he cooled eventually because he could see that they were sort of playing with words and playing with the music of words, whereas he wanted to use words to dig down into deeper realities. So he said they steered words onto the cliff of music. Okay. In other words, they just fall off the cliff and they're gone. They haven't actually contributed to...
so away from meaning.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so did they welcome the Expressionists? I imagine some of them remained his friends. Did they welcome Wang Lun when that was published?
Well, this was quite strange. I mean, Döblin remained friends with all these, people he'd worked with in the Expressionist movement, but they completely ignored Wang Lun, which was the first, what you could say was the first long-form piece of Expressionist prose. But they weren't interested in it.
So I'm Döblin. I'm sitting down to write my new epic. I'm steering away from my Expressionist friends. I'm digging deeper into the world that I want to create. How am I doing that? What does he do?
Well, first of all, when you say sitting down to write Wang Lun, that the sitting down to do the writing comes after a very considerable period of gestation.
Okay.
For instance, I mean, let me quote from Döblin describing how he went about writing Wang Lun. He says, when I wrote a Chinese novel, I made several visits to the Museum of Anthropology in Berlin and read a number of travelogues on China and accounts of Chinese customs. But how misleading is the term I use here, read? At the time, I had no intention of busying myself with China, never even dreamt of travelling to China, but I had a fundamental spiritual experience or mindset which I tended with the greatest care and furnished it with everything it needed to work itself out. So this working out is happening in jotters, in sketches, in writing lists of interesting Chinese clothes or cities or whatnot, and all the time his mind is churning over with this fundamental spiritual experience.
So he's like terraforming his world there.
I guess you could say that, or he's channeling something there in the world, something that's been there in the world. I mean, in the Chinese case, for 2,500 years, from the time that Taoism became an influential religion of this idea that you can't conquer the world by being strong and fierce. You conquer the world by being meek and so on. So this was his experience, that he built the whole story of Wang Lun around this kind of Taoist idea.
Okay, so would in that respect then, so he's quite spiritual.
He he grew up in a Jewish family, but not a particularly kind of believing Jewish family. He found sort of going off to the synagogue a very depressing experience generally, and didn't particularly want to learn to write with Hebrew letters and so on. So he wasn't really a practicing Jew when he grew up. He registered as a Protestant, I think, when he got married, but again didn't go to church and so on. But he was always concerned with matters of the soul, you could say, yes. So eventually in Los Angeles, when he was in exile during the Second World War, he converted to Roman Catholicism. Yes. So you could say, yeah, I mean, he was always spiritual. He always had, some sense of the world, which was not just how to use it, So.
All right, Chris, so let's take it back to our original question, which was, what's the difference between an epic and a shorter form of writing?
Well, it's not just a shorter form of writing, it's a different form of writing.
Okay.
So the standard novel versus the epic. So, as he says, what lifts some or other invented action out of the domain of the merely concocted and written down and puts it into a sphere of truth is the exemplary nature of the action and the characters. We have stark fundamental situations, elemental situations of human existence to be worked through. Okay. So this goes back to Homer, Don Quixote, Dante.
So he's giving himself time and space. So he's in the epic, he's able to give himself that time to create, go into detail and more depth.
Well, it needs space. But it's the what we were just talking about, the fundamental spiritual kind of notion which was working away in him about elemental, about human existence.
Okay.
Right? And of course, this touches on all kinds of issues. You've got, psychology, psychiatry, ideology, propaganda, religion, things like the collective unconscious, thin veneer of civilization. To break through into kind of deeper spheres of human meaning and existence, he really needs this new approach. It's not simply space; it's method as well.
Let's get back to Wang Lun then and talk about its themes. What's its main theme then, Chris?
Well, its main theme is meekness against power. We have these sectarian outcasts who feel somehow they're not at home in the well-governed Manchu Qing dynasty state, which forcefully oppresses anybody who opposes the state, and so they become outcasts and gather together and camp out in the fields and the mountains and so on, and they hope that they can just escape the power of the state. and that turns out not to be quite true. But this idea of non-action versus action is something that's been around for 2,500 years, ever since the Taoist religion sort of developed in China during the Warring States period. So again, let's have a quote where he's contrasting his approach with other authors. Authors boast that they have handed down most truthfully and almost as a documentary the history of an era or a family or an individual as accurately as possible, as close to reality as possible. I think this was a dig at Thomas Mann and his great first novel called Buddenbrooks, which made him very famous in, I think it was 1900 it was published. So maybe using the methods of a theoretician, a historian. Well, if you compare this with the sphere of the hyper-real, of the fantastic, of fabulation, how paltry, wretched, even burlesque are these naturalist writers. The sphere of fantasy and fabulation is simply the negation of the sphere of reality. The sphere of hyper-reality is the sphere of a new truth and a quite special reality.
So would you say he was a fantasy writer then, Chris?
No, I think that would kind of degrade his occupation very fundamentally. Each of his epics was nurtured around a kernel of some niggling notion, which he would nurture for several, maybe years, until enough words and other ideas had coalesced around it to enable him to start the writing.
All right, so he's now finishing off his epic, his first epic. What happens next? Is he satisfied? Is he done?
Every time he finished a book, he sort of flung it from him and didn't want to know anything more about it, basically. He wouldn't even pay much attention to doing the proofreading when the printer sent the printed proofs.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I know from episode 1, for those people who have listened to episode 1, we talked about how he thought it was like unravelling a ball of string. That notion of it.
That's the gestation period.
And then, then there was an end. And once he was done and put it aside. And
yes. And quite late in life, he asked himself, what did these books want? I can still remember. I, who still feel myself as I, wanted nothing to do with them. There were in these things no aims, no desires, no intentions. But at some point I was seized by a message, a report. On each occasion there must have been some item of news or a story, for when it sparked and connected and I held it fast, it proved to be the seed in a mother liquor, a supersaturated solution. Crystals grew in it. And then he talks about the string, the ball of string. But what I unrolled, what flowed out of me in pictures, of course, was I myself, my state at that time, and even more, something that worked in me impersonally, as nature, and loved to take on spiritual, fantastical forms, a meteor, a stone statue, precipitating out of my substance. And when it came to an end, every time I was glad it was over.
Yeah, I can imagine. I like that last part where it says, a meteor, a stone statue, precipitating out. Yeah, that sounds good. Each epic, we know, was a teeming world filled with life and lots of convincing detail.
Yeah, like the fabulations of these mental patients. There's actually a wonderful anecdote by the philosopher Günther Anders, who'd written a review of Berlin Alexanderplatz, and so Döblin agreed to see him to chat about what Döblin thought were this right clever review. So he and Döblin disagreed about some incident in the novel. So Döblin suggested, why not phone Franz Bieberkopf, the main character in the novel, to settle the matter? And Anders had to point out that, first of all, a chap like Bieberkopf wouldn't be in the phone book, and B, he was a character invented by Döblin.
Okay.
So, later on in a different essay, Anders says of Döblin that as a writer he outstripped himself. His creations outshone the creator. In a post-hypnotic amnesia, he betrayed no sign of his actual depths, and to some extent had no notion of those depths, had no understanding of them at all.
Oh, so that's a good lead into our play today. Then into our reading of a play.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. So this is I've sort of dramatised a an examination between Döblin and a patient, which he included in his 1905 dissertation. So here we are in the mental ward on 24th of November 1904. Not yet Dr. Döblin comes in to talk to the patient.
Patient does not recognise the investigator. Asks courteously.
Oh, good day to you, sir. To whom do I owe this pleasure? Very happy to meet you, I'm sure.
When the investigator asserts he knows the patient and calls him by name to prove it, the patient ponders a long while, then...
Oh, yes, I remember now. I sat with you in a tavern in Harsel 2 or 3 years ago. Oh, we only chatted for a few minutes. I know nothing more of it.
Do you know where you are now?
Yeah, I'm in Harsel.
Do you know the year?
The year? It's 1856. It's autumn.
What year were you born?
Let's see, that would be 1856. Did I tell you I was in the war back in 1870?
This is true. He even names the correct regiment.
And then I married directly after the war in 1856.
So you were born in 1856 and you married in 1856?
What? Oh, well, that can't be true, sir. You'd best check your papers again.
I certainly shall. Now, do you go to church on a Sunday?
That's been a while, but I know all about religions. You take that Luther, for example. He founded the Protestant faith. I saw Luther in the flesh around 20 years ago in Freiburg. I didn't speak to him, of course, me being just a simple farmer. How could I just go up to him? He was a small, strong man. He had such a firm voice, and there was all crowding around him.
Can you remind me, where are we now?
Oh, we're in Todmose in a tavern.
Have we met before?
Oh, yes, you're the notary. We've had a deal of serious matters to talk about.
How did you travel to Todmose?
Well, I started out 10 this morning from Harsel to Todmose.
What's the time now?
It's about 12 noon.
But didn't you just have lunch?
Oh, yeah, right. Oh, ha, ha. Yeah, of course, I'm at home now. It's 5 in the afternoon. I'm going to have a coffee.
Patient promptly grasps what he is being asked. Immediately and without effort understands the contradictions pointed out to him. When the investigator deliberately misunderstands him, the patient corrects him. Answer given with unhesitating certainty.
So, 25th November.
Patient doesn't recognise me. I urge, but surely you remember me?
Oh, yes, you're the notary, of course. I know you for sure, sir.
Patient starts to cry, adopts a formal tone.
You're here, sir, to read out a will left by my uncle who passed away not long since.
Can you tell me where we are just now?
Oh, yes, we're in Harsel Town Hall.
When did you arrive here?
Just this morning. I loaded up the wagon last evening.
He gives a precise account of his route from home to the town hall. He met no one along the way. I ask, but how is it you're lying in bed in the town hall?
Well, that's just the way they do it in Harsel. It's often the case when there's a need. After all, I am ill. Doctor says it's TB of the bones and brain. On the 26th of February. Oh, yes, I've met you once before. Can't quite recall where or when. Oh, you're the gentleman who knows all about cattle. Right, you're the vet.
Where are we now?
Oh, on a ship in North America.
How do you know that?
Well, it's a constant rocking, you see. Those trees outside, they show we're in harbour.
What year is it?
What year? I don't know, but it's not 1856 nor 1904.
What have you been doing today?
Well, this morning I set out from St. Louis, had a splendid breakfast there, chocolates and everything. It was a long road, like our old road from Harsel to Basel.
What was your business in America?
I was sent to America by the Harsel Union. They needed me to buy a cow. It was 4 months ago I set off from Harsel.
Who are these other people?
These people lying here? Oh, they're all sick. They have their temperature taken to compare it with the cow's temperature. That's so the cow can always be kept at the right temperature.
Where is the cow?
She's stowed lower down in the ship. I've already been to see her today. I heard her mooing. Why don't you go right away, sir, take a look? Being as you're not a doctor for humans, our doctor's already been today. He was a big gentleman. Name was Rhine. He's American. I went for a stroll with him.
What did you talk about?
Oh, we had a chat about the sale of a bed in that cabin next door. It's been bought by an agent in Germany.
I show great interest in this bed. The patient holds firm to his misperception for an hour while other perception tests are made.
No, I can't read now. It's dark on the ship. They ought to light the lanterns.
Oh, that was great. That was really interesting. So can I just get this right? That's an extract from his actual thesis.
The contents
From his
were all
dissertation.
in the dissertation, but I've turned the indirect speech into direct speech.
Okay,
Yeah.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah, but as Döblin comments about it, there's a great quantity of memory images step out away from their contexts, quite unfixed in space and time. They're disassociated and so become material for fabulation.
Okay, and so I think that probably brings us to a close, does it?
I think that's a good time to finish this episode, yes.
So it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me. Till next time. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Epic Worlds of Alfred Döblin. Join us next time to explore more about this fascinating writer's life and works. Meanwhile, visit the website beyond-alexanderplatz.com for posts about Döblin and some of his unjustly neglected contemporaries, as well as downloads of translations. So until next time, happy reading!